Everyone. Okay, thanks. And welcome back. I'm so happy to see you all again and happy that my computer is working. So I hope you're all in good health and that you're enjoying our St. Louis summer as best we can these days. Before we begin though, I wanted to recommend a documentary series on CNN titled Jerusalem, Series of Faith and Fury. Have any of you seen it yet?
Yes, all of them.
Yeah, it's good. Don't you think, Al?
Excellent, especially last night's.
Yeah. It's on Sunday night, and I think 4 or 5 episodes have been aired so far, and it deals with the history of Jerusalem, and I think it's a great complement to last month's look into Jewish history and art. I think you really will enjoy it. So take a deep breath, Dale. We certainly have covered a lot of ground in the last 2 months, and I really can't believe we're already into our 3rd session of Jewish art. And I think we're proving that Jewish art is definitely a very complicated topic. There are so many ways to look at it. So far, we've investigated Judaica, Bible stories, Jewish subjects, and Jewish history prior to World War II, all in the context of art Islam. And although it may seem like we're blanketing the subject, we really are only scratching the surface. As we continue today, our plan is to investigate art and Islam relating to Germany and World War II, and then focus on Jewish benefactors who helped contribute some of these pieces and many other masterworks to Islam, and thus help make the St. Louis Art Museum the world-class institution that it is. Without these Jewish donors, we would not be in the top 10 museums in the country. It's truly amazing. This may simply look like a picture of a whale, but the image is much more humorous with the tagline. You may say then that the narrative and context add a great deal to the picture. And I think you might find that is true with the art we will see today. The art itself is spectacular, but in addition, the stories are compelling and even at times inspiring. As we said last month, the St. Louis Art Museum is well known for one of the largest and most diverse collections of German art outside of Germany. It ranges from masterpieces of expressionism in the early 20th century, like this painting from Max Pechstein, and paintings from Max Beckmann that we pinpointed last month, to monumental images from the second half of the century, like this one from Gerhard Richter that we will spotlight today. Long recognized internationally for our holdings of German expressionisms at the beginning of the century, we've now added more recent German art to our collection. What had previously been an outstanding collection is now a singular one. A few years ago, I was giving a tour to some docents from various art museums around the country. And when I told them of the artists in our German collection, their jaws dropped. And they said with envy, "You have what?" They just couldn't believe the depth and the quality of our German art. So hold on to your hat as we look at world-class works that surround Judaism, Germany, and World War II, and begin with 2 of our most outstanding works. You know, sometimes it seems that we throw the word masterpiece around willy-nilly, whatever a nilly is. Anyway, you have to agree that many works in Islam are remarkable, even sensational. I have to say, however, Breaking of the Vessels is truly a masterpiece. One of the most important sculptures in Islam, made by one of the most accomplished artists. Uh-oh. Can you all hear me? Okay, I just had a little sign that came up and said, my microphone doesn't work.
We hear you.
You can hear me. Okay. Okay. Then it didn't know what it was talking about. All right. Anselm Keefer was born in Germany in 1945, was not Jewish, but his art is filled with Jewish references. His works are characterized by an unflinching willingness to tackle his culture's dark past in works that are often done on a large confrontational scale, kind of like this one. Though he had no firsthand memory of the catastrophic rule of the Third Reich, Keefer's strategy of opening a sort of Pandora's box of fascist imagery has made him one of the most important artists of his generation. Keefer faces up to the political injustices of the world, particularly the fascist regime's atrocities that were committed against the Jews during World War II. His work is interwoven with layers and layers and layers and layers of meaning, with metaphors from a wide range of sources, from Jewish liturgy to history to mythology. It is filled with political and mystical meaning, references to the past as well as the future. Many have interpreted this magnificent sculpture in different ways. This is my understanding. Breaking of the Vessels represents ideas put forth in the Kabbalah, a collection of ancient Jewish mystical writings. It attempts to deal with questions of good and evil, creation, the Holocaust, and early Nazi persecution of the Jews. It not only deals with issues of tragedy and evil, but also poses the hope of healing and reunification. Much of his work deals with the cycle of decline and destruction that shift into rebirth and regeneration. So let's look more closely at this important work. This is a really big sculpture, weighing over 7 tons and standing 17 feet tall. Lead book folios and broken panes of glass fill the shelves of a monumental bookcase. The lead books reference the centrality of learning in Jewish culture. They are the repository of knowledge. The charred books reference the burning of the books by the Nazis, the destruction of wisdom. Burning was also a method of purification as well as destruction. And so alchemy is also a theme that he often explores. The shattered glass projecting from the shelves and littering the floor beneath the bookcase also recalls Kristallnacht, the Night of the Broken Glass in Germany, when civilians and Nazi paramilitary officers smashed thousands of synagogue windows and Jewish-owned storefronts in November of 1938. One of the most unusual and impressive aspects of Keefer's work is the way he's incorporated the myths and symbols and teachings of the Kabbalah into his confrontations with recent history. According to Kabbalistic tradition, attributes of God's light were divided among 10 glass vessels, not strong enough to hold them. His attributes, such as loving kindness and wisdom, are written in Hebrew on lead markers on each side of the sculpture. You can see that here. I've heard 2 interpretations at this point. In one, the destruction or breaking of the vessels brought the divine into an imperfect world. And in another, these vessels shattered, a state of chaos ensued, and evil entered our world. Harmony is only reattainable through a process of tikkun olam, which translates as world mend. The one purpose of man is to regather the divine shards of broken glass, to do good deeds, and to repair the world. The shattered glass is meant to be dusty. The dust represents the negativity, the unpleasantness, and distress that are part of our lives and must be swept away. The semicircular pane of glass suspended above the bookcase represents the Spirit of God and is inscribed with the words Ein Sof, meaning infinite light. The attributes are linked with copper wire, connecting man at the bottom with God at the top, giving us a sense of hope. In Keefer's breaking of the vessels, it is possible to see an impulse toward mending and a faith in the durability of learning. But to Keefer, this can only be achieved through a process of facing up to its history. Anselm Keefer immersed himself in his subjects. He went to Israel to study Kabbalah in Safed for 1 year, laying the groundwork for this sculpture. He walked the streets in Berlin in a Nazi uniform to understand how one's feelings were altered by the experience. And he lived in a monastery preparing for a work about monks. Breaking of the Vessels is so highly regarded that most art history textbooks today feature this dramatic work. Historian Simon Schama said that Keefer is incapable of making anything trivial. As I said before, this sculpture is literally a masterpiece. So next time you visit the museum, which I hope will be soon, please spend time with Keefer's towering tour de force. It's located in Sculpture Hall in the old building. And I promise, well, first of all, you can't miss it. But secondly, it will be well worth your effort. This massive figure can be found in the sculpture garden at the south entrance of Slam. Aristide Maillol concentrated on the female nude throughout his long career. His sculptures refer back to a kind of classical simplicity. You know, he sort of cut out movement. The figures are static, basically. They don't do anything. They just sort of sit there. He eliminated props, and he generally used monumental, majestic poses like this one. The artist, the sculpture, and the setting are all noteworthy. But today, we will focus on the model. Her name is Dina Verney, and she was a most remarkable woman. This is her story. Dina Virni was Maillol's last muse and platonic companion. She was born into a musical and politically radical Jewish family in Moldova. Her father was an Odessa Jew, a pianist with anarchist leanings who'd been exiled to Siberia. Her father knew Trotsky, but made no attempt to hide his own social democratic inclinations. And by 1925, it became apparent that the new Russian government was not good for their health. So they fled from Odessa in Ukraine and ended up in Paris without a ruble in their pockets. Dina, a dutiful student, seemed destined for a conventional career until a friend of Maillol's met her and concluded that she was a walking Maillol sculpture. He persuaded her to visit Maillol's studio in Paris, and her encounter with Maillol was decisive. She was only 15 years old at the time, and he was 73. Dina described it this way: I became like a daughter and entered the world of Maillol. I went for 1 hour and stayed for 10 years. A generous modeling fee and Maillol's sense of fun won her over. A vivacious and plump teenager with long dark hair, she was to inspire his work and preserve his legacy. So Dina became the key figure in his work. The aging sculptor had found the perfect muse. Their collaboration was highly fruitful and lasted a decade, from 1935 to 44, yielding over 36 sculptures, dozens of drawings, and a number of paintings. Now, when an artist refers to his model as his muse, it's usually his way of dignifying, shall we call it, their joint extramural activities. But in this case, Maillol's model, Dina Verney, genuinely was his muse, not his mistress, posing for monumental works of sculpture that belied her modest height of 5 feet 2 inches. By mutual agreement, the relationship was strictly artistic. For the first 2 years, Dina Virni posed only once or twice a week for Maillol because she was still going to school and was keeping the posing a secret from her parents. And for the first 2 years, she only posed with her clothes on because Maillol was too shy to ask her to take them off. Now this story gets interesting. In 1939, Maillol took refuge from the Nazis at his home in foot of the Eastern Pyrenees. There, Dina began working for a resistance group, helping to smuggle refugees from occupied France across the Pyrenees into Spain. Unbeknownst to Mayol, she was a guide, identifiable to the refugees by her red dress. The work was doubly dangerous because she was Jewish. Mayol was certainly no fascist sympathizer. He was essentially apolitical. Yet, when the story eventually came out, Mayol, a native of the region, showed Dina's secret shortcuts, smugglers' routes, and goat paths. She even used his studio as a halfway house. She met her charges at the train station in her red dress, and they followed her in silence all the way to the Spanish border. By 1943, the Gestapo had the idea that she was some kind of a Matahari. She was arrested twice, and Mayol saved her both times. The second time, through the intercession of his friend Arno Breker, who ironically was a Nazi and known as Hitler's favorite sculptor. After the birth of each of her sons, Dina wrote a letter to Arno Breker, thanking him for saving her life. She rescued hundreds of refugees, but couldn't save the life of her own father, who died at Auschwitz in 1944, the same year that Mayol died in an automobile accident. Verney had 3 husbands and went on to a successful career as a collector and exhibitor of works by revolutionist artists. In the 1970s, she smuggled the work of dissident Russian artists out of the Soviet Union. She became a curator and a champion of Mayol's art, and as such, she burnished his artistic legacy. Some pieces from our permanent collection are connected to art looted by the Nazis during World War II. The history of ownership or provenance of works of art has always been an integral part of scholarship at SLAM, even more so today. The European Provenance Disclosure Project identifies and provides up-to-date information on all European paintings in the museum's collection that may have been purchased, sold, or created during the Nazi era. Our website has a link into the information on the clear provenance and transparent ownership of these works of art. So, SLAM conducts intense scrutinization of the history of every work that enters the collection, especially these days. It has been called the greatest art theft in history. Nearly 750,000 works of art were looted from Europe by the Nazis, thousands of which were never recovered. Nazi party members began looting and hiding artworks, partly due to Hitler's desire to open a Führer museum to exhibit all the most valuable and acclaimed works of European art, and partly due to the Nazi assault on modernism. Great works that did not fit the ideal classical German style were publicly burned or confiscated. Most of these were modern artworks that had been systematically seized from museums and Jewish collections under Hitler's dictatorship, and then stored in depots or sold directly. Confiscated artworks were often saved for private Nazi and German collections, while some pieces were sold to buyers through neutral countries like Switzerland to raise capital to purchase materials for the Nazi war machine. These are a few of the works in our collection that in one way or another survived the Nazi era and then made their way to SLAM. If the prominent man and woman in these paintings could talk, the tale they might tell of an incredible journey to St. Louis. While their origins began in the 16th century, their adventure began in the 1940s when Nazi soldiers stole them. They were taken from their Jewish owner named Priester and then stored, as many thousands of artworks were, in the salt mines in Austria that were used as storage facilities for looted Nazi art and for protection from Allied bombing raids. These mines also offered the appropriate humidity and temperature conditions for artworks. At the end of World War II, the Allies found plundered artwork in more than 1,000 repositories across Germany and Austria. A special force of American and British curators, art museums, and others, called the Monuments Men, risked their lives scouring Europe to prevent the destruction of thousands of years of culture by the Nazis. Under their direction, nearly 700,000 pieces were identified and restituted to the countries from which they were taken. I'm sure you all remember the movie with George Clooney and Matt Damon and John Goodman. But these works by Hans Meilich were rescued by the real monuments men. Without the work of these curators and professors, tens of thousands of priceless works of art would have been lost to the world forever. These paintings were restored to their original Austrian owner and later given to the St. Louis Art Museum in 2006 by their heir. And now they sit in all their finery side by side at SLAM, thanks to an Allied effort in World War II. Along with works of art stolen from Jewish families, there were also works that had been defamed by the Nazis as degenerate art. Now, some of you may have been on a Zoom presentation with Dan Rich that focused on degenerate art, but many of you were not. And this is a topic, I think, that is important in the story of art in World War II. So please forgive any redundancies. Soon after their rise to power in 1933, the Nazis purged so-called degenerate art from German public institutions. Artworks deemed degenerate by the Nazis included modern artists in the areas of Cubism, Expressionism, and even Impressionism. Approximately 16,000 were removed, and by 1938, the Nazi Party declared that German art museums were purified. In 1937, 650 works were presented in the Degenerate Art exhibit, which opened in Munich and traveled to 11 other cities. Surprisingly, there were 2 million visitors. By contrast, the Great German Art exhibit of acceptable German art was heavily promoted and held around the corner in a spacious new building. Still, it attracted fewer than 500,000 visitors. Today, we would probably recognize almost all of the artists in the Degenerate Art Show, and only a few, if any, in the Great Art Exhibition. So the Nazis believed that art should not deform or alter nature. They declared that there would be no place for modernist experimentation in the right. These artists, they claimed, did not display German family values. It was decreed that this art showed qualities such as decadence, weakness of character, mental disease, and racial impurity. The show was put together in 2 weeks, and so the aesthetic experience was not important. In fact, they wanted it to be disturbing. 6 Jewish artists, including Chagall and Gross, that we talked about in the previous presentations, were exhibited in one room. Some paintings had no frames. Labels were handwritten, illegible, and insulting. Derisive slogans ran across the walls. Texts like, "Nature is seen by sick minds," or "Revelation of the Jewish racial soul," or monstrosities of insanity, insolence, incompetence, and degeneration. The Nazis said they hoped, quote, to make money from this garbage. And so an auction of degenerate artworks took place in 1939 at the Fischer Galleries in Lucerne, Switzerland, in order to increase revenues for the party. 3 works in our collection deemed degenerate were confiscated, then exhibited, auctioned, or sold. This masterworks, Bathers with a Turtle, was confiscated, labeled degenerate art, and sent to Lucerne for auction with 200 others. Joseph Pulitzer bought it on his honeymoon in Switzerland. He said that he had a moral dilemma. If he bought the painting, the money would go to the Nazi war machine. And if he didn't buy the painting, it would be destroyed or would have been thrown into a bonfire. He decided to save the painting and donated it to SLAM. The painting by Max Beckmann, Christ and the Sinner, was featured in the first room of the Degenerate Art Show. Hitler claimed it was an insolent mockery of the divine, and the artist was either mad or criminal. The painting was confiscated from the Künstlerli Mannheim Museum, and it was sold right away to Kurt Valentin, a German New York gallery owner who bequeathed it to Slam in 1955. The painting Village on the Sea by Carl Schmidt Rutloff was also part of the Degenerate Art show. It was bought by the same New York gallery and then sold to Morton May, who donated it to Slam in 1983. There are other works in Slam that survived the Nazi era. All of these were acquired from the families of the original owners or bought at auction. So let's just look at a few. In the early 40s, this German sculpture, Virgin and Child, was confiscated from the home of a German Jewish doctor and his wife, who died in a concentration camp. The son immigrated to Salem, Illinois in 1946. The sculpture was recovered and sent to him after the war. He hired a hearse to transport the sculpture so it would be protected, and he donated it to Slam. The director of Slam at the time said the family kept it in their house so that they would be thought to be Christian, but tragically they were found out. This painting by Franz Marc, Little Mountain Goats, was confiscated from the collection of a Jewish businessman and his wife. They were killed in Sobibor. Their daughter brought a number of small paintings to the United States, and Morton May purchased this from a New York gallery and donated it to Slam. Ernst Ludwig Kirchner's Circus Rider was kept in an underground secret collection. The mother brought the collection to the United States after the collector died, and it was purchased by Morton May and donated to Slam. This ancient Greek amphora with an image of Nike was confiscated from the collection of Ludwig Pollock, a German archaeology expert in Rome. He and his family perished in the concentration camps. Most of their collection had been dispersed, and Slam purchased this amphora from a dealer. Philippe de Champagne's Vincent Voiture at St. Louis is one of the many pictures looted from the stock of a German art dealer in France. It was stored in the Austrian salt mines, and in 1945, it was returned to its owners, the Seligmans. It was purchased by Slam in 1961 at auction at Christie's. These then are just some of the pieces from our permanent collection that are connected to art stolen by the Nazis during World War II. Incredibly, around 20% of the art in Europe was looted by the Nazis. And though the artworks featured here had been recovered and returned to the descendants of their rightful owners, and although the Nazis were known for their thorough record keeping, it's worth remembering that nearly 100,000 pieces of art are still missing, and some embroiled in ownership disputes. It is possible that many have been destroyed, while others could be hidden from the public or are circulating for large profits. A new group of painters and sculptors began to emerge on the German art scene in the 1960s. This generation of artists, all of whom grew up after World War II, was driven to deal with German atrocities in the years following the Nazi era. They mainly felt the need to confront Germany with its recent past. So ask yourself, how would a German artist respond to his world after World War II, the Holocaust, the genocide, the devastation, and the destruction? Because that's the question these artists had to answer. And the answers were not easy, and the results not always pretty. German artists after the war had distinct and at times unconventional and unorthodox ways of dealing with Germany's unspeakable past. But deal with it, they did. Okay, let's just come out with it and say that German art is often not easy. These works can be difficult. There's a tension, a toughness. The colors are harsh. The lines are jagged. They can be jarring and uncomfortable, and it can be difficult to understand their allusions and symbolism. But again, this was the goal of many of these artists. They wanted you to feel uncomfortable, uneasy, and disturbed. After all, they were talking about a nightmarish era of German history. Most did not participate in World War II, but their art is by and large entwined with it. They were generally born in the 30s and all experienced war, devastation, and destruction of Germany. They felt that what had been good about Germany was destroyed by the Nazis. They felt that they couldn't move forward until they addressed their Nazi past, and that none of them was willing to ignore the issues of German guilt and responsibility. Outside of the immediate references to the Nazi era in World War II, some of these artists in the 60s were also deeply influenced by the division of East and West Germany. Many artists lost their homeland. Their work is recognized internationally as among the most significant contributions to art in the second half of the 20th century. The Nazis, World War II, the Holocaust, the Iron Curtain, the defeat and division of Germany were all at the core of their art. So their work simply couldn't be agreeable, good humor, or carefree when these were the issues they were addressing. So let's look at some of these artists in our collection who came to prominence in the 1960s. New tough guys having a dialogue with Germany's ugly past. George Baselitz grew up during and after World War II in the austerity of communist East Germany. He adopted the surname Baselitz as a tribute to his hometown. His father was a member of the Nazi Party, and he grew up the son of a humiliated man. The landscape around him had been devastated, and his world was rubble. He saw the results of the war and what the Nazi regime had done, and what the people in Germany had done. And his paintings deal with that experience and his opinion about it. Baselitz is best known for his paintings of upside down imagery. By inverting the image, Baselitz depicts a world that is topsy-turvy. The world had been turned upside down. Baselitz paints like this. He does not paint right side up and then just turn them upside down. He paints them upside down. Baselitz says, quote, "There's some sort of irritation, the view of them, and that's intentional. When you're irritated, you pay closer attention. It makes sense, but there is nevertheless something discombobulating about seeing a Baselitz upturned painting. You kind of want to turn it right side up." In White Woman, George Baselitz based the inverted figure on a photograph of a Russian woman in Germany after World War II. The woman who went from prisoner to victor now supervised German women tasked with cleaning up ruined cities. This painting recalls shared memories of Germans who had to construct new lives in the aftermath of the atrocities of the Holocaust and the loss of a war that left poverty and destruction in its wake. With its ironies and inversions, the painting comments on destruction, on changing fortunes and tragedies of war. In Landscape with Pathos, with its palette of soft natural tones, first appears to be a gestural abstract painting. But upon longer study, an upside down landscape becomes apparent with the sky and clouds depicted in the lower half, as you see here. The world again had been turned upside down. The famously cantankerous artist Baselitz ranks among Germany's highest priced living artists. Earlier this year, he provoked a storm when he claimed female artists couldn't paint.
No. Were you with her? Does it come suddenly?
Marcus Lupertz was born in 1941. Lupertz was a dandy, always dressed with a little hanky in his coat pocket and walking with a fancy cane that he really didn't need. He was said to be arrogant and condescending and egotistic. Lupertz wanted to confront the past, not bury it. He used imagery that dealt with what had happened. German motif was executed with intense colors, stark outlines, and a magnified scale. This is a really big painting. Aspects of the composition recall symbols associated with Nazi ideology and elements of German myth and history co-opted by the Nazi Party. For example, the sheaf of wheat and spade would have been associated with the Nazi organization intended to indoctrinate youth. Marcus Lupertz modeled the pose of Titan after an ancient Greek sculpture of the god Zeus, preparing to throw a spear or lightning bolt. According to Greek mythology, Zeus led the Olympian gods to victory over the Titans, an older generation of mighty deities in a 10-year battle to control the earth. Zeus was the child of Cronus, that kind of head Titan, and a seer prophesied that one day Cronus's children would overthrow him. So Cronus did everything he could to prevent it, including eating his children. On the pleas of his wife, he left Zeus alive, who managed to eventually dethrone him and end the age of the Titans. This larger-than-life work has roughly formed features and a bumpy, uneven texture that expresses the brute strength of the Titans. But I think there's more to this sculpture. Maybe the story itself, the rough textures, and the broken and distorted features might represent Germany. Germany, Lupertz said, had destroyed itself and ate its own, much like the Titans. Germany was broken and crumbling and falling apart, just like the sculpture. Let me just figure out how to get this off. Okay, I'm sorry. All right, let's go to the next one. A.R. Pank was born in Dresden and was the only artist who stayed in Germany to try to live with communism. He was deported to the West in 1980. The communists felt that his art was subversive and didn't conform, so he couldn't exhibit and therefore couldn't sell. Pank secretly met his agent in the woods with his paintings wrapped and hidden in bed linens, and they were smuggled out. Pank is best known for stick figures, which he developed to be used kind of like a sign language. He felt that if everyone in the world spoke the same language, there would be less chance of war. And you can see one of these stick figures right here on the bottom that he put into many of his paintings. I guess he was looking for a metaphor for a better society. Seemingly abstract and at first glance, Fritze contains a hidden face. Narrow shoulders and a vast head and a golden eye rise from the colorful brushstroke. I must admit, I can see the eye, but I can't make out a face. Most people do eventually see it. I just, for some reason, I can't. In the upper right corner is a form resembling the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. In a divided Berlin, this sign of Germany's former strength had become a symbol for the loss of a unified national identity. It's about the menace of military power. Fritzi is the German word or the German name for a soldier in World War II. And Pank had been drafted into the army and had had a pretty bad time of it. So this too is kind of loaded with context. In the next painting, Talb, a black eagle, a long-standing symbol of German national identity, hovers above the German word Blut, or blood, spelled backward. Germany had gone in the wrong direction, downhill, backward. Here the eagle is flying over a destroyed landscape. When paired with the word Blut, it recalls the terror and bloodshed of World War II and the Holocaust. Pank was suggesting the responsibility of Germany as a whole to examine its past. Richter was born in East Germany and fled to the West just before the wall was built. He is probably the highest paid artist alive today of anybody. I think Slam has over 24 paintings and prints and photographs by Richter. He's unique in that his style constantly changes. He can move from realism to abstraction, to expressionism, to photography, to minimalism, and back again. And you can see that in the following works. Gerhard Richter based Betty on a 1978 photograph of his 11-year-old daughter, Betty. She turns away from the viewer, possibly toward one of Richter's own monochrome paintings. It's an iconic work, leading into the future by looking into the dark past. These three monumental diptychs, January, December, November, evoke a somber and mysterious mood. When seen together, they create an enveloping environment, not unlike the experience of a blurred landscape, glimpsed through the rain-splattered window of a moving car. It's about time, about winter, and a sense of drabness and melancholy. Richter created this sense of movement in these works by dragging large squeegee spatulas across the canvases, simultaneously applying new paint while scraping off previous layers. These gigantic paintings took 8 months to complete. The titles of these three diptychs, November, December, and January, provide some historical grounding and clues to the interpretations as well. Past, present, and future seem to be submerged in layers of paint in these massive paintings. In November of 1989, a divided Germany collapsed as East German government opened the Berlin Wall. It appears as if the emotional and political blackness of communism seems to give way to the color and light of freedom and change. They're incredible works. In Gray Mirror, Gerhard Richter applied monochrome gray paint to the reverse sides of these 4 6-foot-tall glass panels. Instead of producing an image, Richter transforms the gray paint on glass into a ground for reflection. Viewers can see themselves and their surroundings mirrored on the dark surfaces. So in essence, it's a mirror of society. He likes gray because he claims that people feel neutral about it and it doesn't evoke any emotion. He claims that it speaks to our own indifference. And indifference, he claims, we can never again afford. It was made for our museum specifically. One boy on a tour several years ago asked if it was still art when the lights were out and you couldn't see yourself. Thought that was a great question. Joseph Beuys was the only artist in this section to have served in the war. He claims to have been shot down in Siberia and rescued by the Tartans, who brought him back to life, wrapping him in a felt blanket and fat. So he uses felt in many of his sculptures as a metaphor for healing, survival, for warmth. Out of World War II, he came up with the idea of renewal and battling causes. For example, wrapping a piano in felt was to Beuys a metaphor for saving culture. Beuys was a teacher and mentor to many of the artists we've just seen. At times, he was so famous, everyone said they studied with him. The original felt suit, issued in an edition of 100, was worn in a performance event protesting the Vietnam War in the Dusseldorf Art Academy in 1971. It was intended to convey the idea of warmth. For Beuys, warmth was not only a physical state, but also a spiritual ideal. Joseph Beuys used Urbis II during one of his legendary chalk talks. These were performances and lectures he gave throughout the 60s and 70s. He held a strong conviction that ideas, not objects, were the most important form sculpture could take. Already notorious for his use of materials like felt or fat, Beuys turned to words to mold and express his ideology. This cartoon just made me stop and laugh. This next section won't make you laugh, but it will certainly make you stop and think. As we've just demonstrated, Slam is internationally known for the strength of its 20th century German collection. The paintings and sculptures we've seen are merely the tip of the iceberg. And incredibly, we have Jewish donors to thank for much of it. The St. Louis Art Museum is typical of American museums in that the shape and texture of its collection arise not only from museum purchases, but also from a series of gifts and bequests from St. Louis collectors. The generosity of these donors and the strength and character of their gifts have helped make the art museum one of the best in the country. It's amazing that almost 75% of our permanent collection was acquired as some sort of gift, which in scope and quality transformed the museum as a whole. I think it's important to recognize how significant these donors have been and how they continue to be important to the museum. Here are just a few of the Jewish donors who have helped populate the museum with masterpieces that a Met or a MoMA would envy. Without them, we wouldn't be the world-class institution we are today. Let's highlight just some of these Jewish donors. We'll begin with the collector who made the most significant impact on the museum. Everyone who grew up in St. Louis is familiar with Morton May, the grandson of one of the founders of May department stores. Buster continued on the path of his father's and grandfather's legacy of Jewish philanthropy with the funding of the May Foundation, which helped the Jewish Federation support of Jewish community. He was called by many a major pillar of the Jewish community and the Jewish Federation for many years. Okay, in 1983, he donated to the museum 5,500 works of art. 5,500 works of art, nearly 20% of the museum's total collection, with a focus on German Expressionism, pre-Columbian, Oceanic, and African art. It's remarkable to learn that when May was thinking of purchasing an object, he considered the museum's interests as well as his own. He bought with the intention of rounding out the museum's collection. Here are a few of his remarkable gifts. When his contemporaries were buying Picassos, Buster was buying tough German expressionist pictures that turned out to be masterpieces. May was enthralled with their intensity and power, and so is the art world today. A work by Kirchner sold for $38 million just several years ago. These are but a few of the German expressionist works that May gave to Slam. This collection put us on the map. In 1948, Max Beckmann accepted a temporary position to teach at Washington University. There, he met May, who had already been purchasing his work and became an important collector. He commissioned Beckmann to paint his portrait. Early in his career, Beckmann sought to emulate a 19th century French tradition of grand paintings of contemporary events, such as the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. Of the 2,200 passengers, 1,500 died. In his later paintings, Max Beckmann dreamed up a world of actors, cabaret singers, heroes, and circus imagery as a metaphor for the world and its folly. The large triptych was painted during his exile in Amsterdam in World War II. The self-portrait, one of 40, was painted a year before his death. As I said before, it's important to remember that thanks to Morton May, we have the largest collection of Beckmann paintings and prints outside of Germany. A Beckmann painting sold at auction recently for $42 million. May also began to focus on ancient American, Oceanic, and African art. This vessel depicting the Mayan ballgame is considered a masterpiece of pre-Columbian art. As my grandmother always said, if there was a fire, God forbid, 1,000,000 times, this would be one of the pieces we would save. May was drawn to the charged power of these pieces. The works you see here are fine examples of the energy and eloquence he saw in non-Western art. Our museum continues to exhibit about 2,000 works from our permanent collection every day on a daily basis. Incredibly, 16% will be gifts or bequests from one Jewish donor, Morton May. Joseph Pulitzer is well known to all of us. He ran the St. Louis Post-Dispatch for 31 years, and he chaired the board which was responsible for awarding the Pulitzer Prize. Pulitzer's heritage was Jewish. He was an acculturated Jew who married an Episcopalian and did not raise his children as Jews. However, he was an intensely Jewish man in his temperament and his commitment to social justice. While he carried on the family business in St. Louis, he was also busy building one of the greatest private art collections in the 20th century. Here are some of the incredible gifts from the Pulitzers. Joe was always interested in art. While a senior at Harvard this is when he was a senior in Harvard, in 1936, he purchased his first serious painting, this Modigliani portrait of Elvira, and he hung it in his dorm room. He used his allowance to buy it. His quarters reflected elegance, unusual for a student. It was furnished not only with a carpet, but also a baby grand piano. Must have been a pretty big dorm room. Mine was hardly big enough for me, but anyway, Pulitzer purchased 6 Picassos the year he graduated from Harvard. Over the next years, he collected dozens of European modernist paintings, such as works by Picasso, culminating in his 1939 purchase of Bathers with a Turtle while on his wedding trip. As we mentioned before, Pulitzer, honeymooning with his first wife, Lulu, in 1939, paid $2,400 for this painting in Switzerland at the Nazi auction of degenerate work. Since that purchase, this painting's value has been estimated at 10,000 times what it cost Pulitzer, okay, it's telling me my microphone's bad again. Can you still hear me? Okay. All right. By the mid-1970s, Joseph Pulitzer III was known as much for being editor and publisher of the Post as he was for his collection of contemporary art, regarded as one of the largest and finest in the world. These paintings by Guston, Lichtenstein, Newman, and Lewis are just a smattering of the gems that he donated to Slam. Throughout his life, Joe felt there were pictures he could not live without. Raise the money, sell anything but the newspaper, he once told a man eager to pick up a Picasso for $315,000. His houses were jam-packed with masterpieces. Surprisingly, he was known for his casual handling of some art. A Monet painting of water lilies was exposed to extreme St. Louis temperatures in Pulitzer's pool house. And in one photo, Christmas greenery is draped around the Matisse. Following his 1973 marriage to Emily Rao, the sole curator at Slam, the focus of Pulitzer's collecting widened, embracing pop art and minimalism. Along with Emily, Joe Pulitzer was endowed with an exceedingly gifted eye and mind for modern art. Just look at these. Emily is an ardent and effective advocate for modernism in the American Midwest, along with a canny understanding of the art market. And her involvement in generosity toward the St. Louis Art Museum has been invaluable and continues to be to this day. Their collections and their contributions included artists such as Pollock, Richter, Picasso, and Keefer, whose thumbprints shaped late 20th century art. Sidney Schoenberg was the son of one of the founding partners of May department stores. As a boy, he moved from Kansas City to St. Louis when his father and David May, the grandfather of Morton May, purchased famous bar department stores in St. Louis. He and his father later formed CIT, Commercial Credit Financial Corp. The Schoenberg family name is synonymous with Jewish hospital, as the family was among the original contributors dating back to 1901. The nursing school, the Schoenberg Research Building, and the Sidney Schoenberg Pavilion were all built as a result of their contributions. Sidney Schoenberg's great success in business fueled his ability to pursue his lifelong passion for fine art, specifically French Impressionist and Post-Impressionist paintings, such as these works by Van Gogh, Monet, Gauguin, and Braque, which he donated to SLAM. In 1964, he and his family began a series of gifts, including our most popular works by Kelly, Rothko, Diebenkorn, and Close. Over 50 years, the Schoenberg family has given gifts that have made an enormous impact on the modern and contemporary collection areas. It blows the mind. I mean, it's hard to think of our museum without these groundbreaking seminal works. Many significant Schoenberg gifts came through the Schoenberg Foundation, which Sidney himself established. These sculptures you see here, especially the Judd boxes, are fan favorites, and their foundation continues to support purchases for the museum, like the Degas Milliners, even today. All three sons continued the family's interest in fine art and gave works such as this by Joseph Albers to the museum. There's no question that the very high quality of the museum's modern and contemporary collection is due in large part to the generosity of the Schoenberg family and the Schoenberg Foundation. Over 15% of the works installed in the new building and the outdoors are their gifts. That's pretty extraordinary. Etta Steinberg looks like she had much more than just a splash of personality. In 1913, she married Mark Steinberg, also descended from a German-American Jewish family that had settled in St. Louis. Mark Steinberg founded the Mark C. Steinberg Company brokerage firm, where he worked until his death in 1951. They lived on Morrison Road next to Morton May's house. Inspired by outdoor skating in New York City in 1957, Etta opened the Mark C. Steinberg skating rink in Forest Park and added a Jacques Lipschitz sculpture to the site in 1962. Their trust also funded Steinberg Hall of Art and Archaeology at WashU in 1960. Etta Steinberg was active in parallel efforts in Jewish women's groups that raised funds in St. Louis for immigrant aid, the physically handicapped, and reconstruction effort in post-war Europe. They also funded a new wing for Jewish hospital in St. Louis. While on a trip to Europe, Etta remarked that she thoroughly enjoyed paintings and wanted to collect. Soon after, they passed a shop with a Chagall in the window and promptly went in and bought it. This was the beginning. When Mark Steinberg died, Etta, in charge of a charitable trust, funded their considerable fortune and began a sequence of gifts for 3 decades that transformed the museum's holdings. Among her gifts were Degas' Little Dancer and Cézanne's Bathers and Gauguin's Madame Roland. Within her first years of collecting, Steinberg began to concentrate on Impressionist and Post-Impressionist canonical artists like these. Wow, if these don't blow your mind, just look at these next gifts. Etta's ambition in bringing the best to St. Louis was particularly evident in her highly important gift in 1956 of one of Monet's panels of water lilies. Along with Van Gogh paintings, our collection became world-class. SLAM claimed a prominent place on the national art scene, thanks in large part to Etta Steinberg. I had a friend who played with the Steinberg's grandchildren, and they tell stories of how they would go to their house and play catch in their living room while a Monet painting hung nonchalantly over their sofa. I just can't imagine playing ball in front of these masterpieces. Etta and Mark's daughter Florence and her husband Richard began to collect art during the 50s. One son remembers at about age 12 coming home from school and having dinner with Picasso and the director of MoMA, Alfred Barr. It's obvious that in this family, art was a way of life. Works by artists such as Vuillard, Picasso, Calder, Matisse, Lipschitz, and more grace our museum today because of their generosity. The grandchildren continue in this vein. Mark, professor of history at WashU, has collected Rembrandt, Dürer, and old master prints and promised them to Slam. John has served as a museum commissioner, and he and his wife Annabeth have donated and promised post-war German masterpieces to the museum. The three generations of this family clearly inspired each other in their new passion for collecting, and also as an ideal of civic philanthropy. There have been and continues to be so many more Jewish donors who have contributed wonderful works of art to the museum. Let's briefly look at just a few more. Lucy Lapata is considered one of the most generous philanthropists, both Jewish and general causes. Among her activities, in addition to the demanding job of serving as president of JFED Women's Division, she was a board member of the Federation itself and chair of the Women's Division campaign. Beginning in 1986, the Lapatas donated more than 25 French Renaissance enamels and Italian ceramics, which put us on the map. Hope and Julian Edison. Under Julian Edison's leadership, Edison Brothers became one of the largest apparel and footwear companies in the United States. Hope and Julian's donations to the St. Louis Art Museum are mainly works on paper by a variety of old masters and modern artists such as Lichtenstein, Hogarth, Rembrandt, Beckmann portfolios, and Bosch. They have also been part of a number of group acquisitions of such highlights as Andy Goldsworthy's Stone Sea. Paul and Alyssa Kahn elevated the museum's collections with gifts including 156 Native American and South American weavings, as well as masterworks of 17th and 18th century American and English silver. Since its creation in 1993, the Paul and Alyssa Kahn Foundation has provided funding to St. Louis art groups, educational organizations, and the Jewish Federation of St. Louis. Covenant Place Community for Seniors is named in honor of the couple. The Kahns have been a very important part of the museum community, and their incredible collections have been featured in several exhibitions at the St. Louis Art Museum. Ron and Jane Greenberg. While Jane Greenberg was becoming an award-winning author of children's books about art, Ron became a prominent art collector, dealer, and expert and opened the Greenberg Gallery in 1972 in Clayton. To encircle base plate hexagram right angles inverted by Richard Serra was donated to the St. Louis Art Museum by the Greenbergs in 1984. The Greenbergs also began donating powerful and amazing works to the St. Louis Art Museum by artists such as Frank Stella, Bruce Nauman, Andy Warhol, and Jasper Johns. Nancy and Ken Kranzberg have donated time, energy, and resources to more than 500 civic, social, and arts organizations, including the Federation, Anti-Defamation League, Grand Center, Inc., the St. Louis Art Museum, and the Contemporary Art Museum. The Kranzberg Arts Foundation is invaluable to the city and has transformed Grand Center. Their collecting focus has mainly been local artists, but their contribution to the museum has been in conjunction with many other donors for pieces such as Keefer's Breaking of the Vessels or Louise Bourgeois' Cell. So lastly, I just want to say this. Sometimes I'll stand in the galleries and just marvel at these works of art and think about the men and women who made it possible. It's truly amazing. These are a group of incredibly generous men and women devoted to enhancing the cultural landscape of our city. Their lives reveal a fascinating intersection of passion for collecting all types of art with a generous spirit of community and Midwestern pride. St. Louis continues to enjoy incredible patronage from so many philanthropic individuals. They are truly inspirational, and they are Jewish. Charity and generosity always make a difference. And as we've briefly seen in the previous slides, and as you can see in the photos of their gifts on the museum walls, these men and women have certainly made a difference. There are so many Jewish benefactors at the St. Louis Art Museum who've helped make it the world-class institution that it is, whether through donations of works of art, as we've seen, or through financial contributions. The Jewish benefactors at the yearly thank you dinner are so numerous that I almost feel like I'm at High Holy Day services. I honestly think that there are about 30 to 40% of the museum's benefactors are Jewish. Kind of makes me proud. So today's talk focused on some incredible collectors and some sensational works of art. I hope you enjoyed it. Our final presentation of this series next month will focus on Jewish artists at SLAM. You won't believe how many there are. Their biographies are fascinating and their art is spectacular. You'll love it. So again, thanks for joining us. Stay safe and well, and we hope to see you next time. Are there any questions or comments that we have, if I can make my computer work?
Gail, I just want to thank you. This has just been an amazing program, and I've seen each one of them so far. Also, I really appreciate that you pointed out the donors. I think it's really important to understand the generosity and the connection between Jewish people and art and culture. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, because I think sometimes, when I walk through the galleries and I look at the paintings, every once in a while you'll read the labels and you'll see some interesting some discussions and some descriptions of the painting. What I think is really interesting is to look down at the donors, and you'll see how many Jewish donors there are. It's just amazing. And these are the seminal works in our collection.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Monet's water lilies, it's amazing. It really is. And it kind of makes your heart feel good.
Right.
Anybody else have anything they want to say, or questions that they have?
I don't see. I
Go
have
ahead.
a question, Dale. Eileen Brooks, in the Anselm Keefer work, when it was moved from one room, how do they do the glass? Does he have a diagram, or is it just literally randomly put?
Oh,
And breaking of the vessels.
That I was going to talk about that, but I think I didn't have time. So I'm glad you asked that question, because it was probably one of the most interesting few days I had ever spent at the museum. For those of you that don't remember, the Keefer, the breaking of the vessels used to be on the second floor. And it was so heavy, I think it weighs 7 tons or something, that it was starting to kind of break the floor or something. So they had to move it down and to the main gallery where the floors were reinforced. In order to do that, they brought in, some of that equipment that, and they hauled it over they took it apart and hauled it over the balcony. That's how they got it down, because it was so big. They lowered it down into Sculpture Hall. As far as what they did with the glass, they took thousands of pictures of how these were all situated, because Keefer was the one that put this all together at the beginning. So they had thousands of pictures and marked, numbers that corresponded with the photographs that were on the pieces of glass. So they knew exactly where everything was supposed to go when they reinstalled it. It was really interesting to see. One funny story about it is that, as I said, the dust is supposed to be on top of the glass. They're not supposed to get rid of it, because that's the negativity in our life that has to be swept away. But one of the housekeepers who was cleaning them didn't know that, and she started cleaning the dust off the off the glass at one point. So that was kind of it had to grow its own dust again. But that was a very interesting and a good question. I mean, it was a major process to move it from the second floor to the first. It will never move again. It will always be where it is, I think.
Thank you.
But go spend some time with it again. It's just wonderful. It's incredible. Anybody else?
Great. I think we have a couple of comments and they're also complimentary. Dale, thank you for your presentation. You're amazing, terrific presentation, very informative and puts lots of what we see in context. Those are some of the comments that people are typing, and it's just, everybody is just so happy and inspired by your lectures on this art, and we want to thank you very much, Mirawood Center and Stephen and I, and it's just a wonderful program and everyone is thoroughly enjoying it.
Well, I'm glad. I apologize. I'm going to get a new computer. I mean, this is just, it's making me not sleep. So
Oh.
I think it's only 4 years old. Wouldn't you think it would be okay?
Yeah, I think it would be okay. But you know what, computers, I was making a comment this morning, they just sometimes have a mind of their own and they don't want to cooperate with us. So
That's for sure. That's for sure. Well, thank you all for coming, and
Thank you.
take it, everyone stay safe. Stephen, can we talk for a few minutes?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.
thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
We'll see you all next time. Well, I do apologize, you guys. I mean, I was crying this morning. I mean, literally, it was like, oh no.